Hey everyone, and welcome back to another episode of The Ordinary. I'm your host, Jalp, and today's episode is a little different from the entrepreneurial path that we've experienced with past guests like Dave and Mayman. Today, I'm joined by someone whose journey through the corporate world has been equally inspiring, Shaan. Shaan's a director at a major company and a former BCG consultant. But what's most impressive is how he's managed to grow in his career without losing himself. He stays grounded in his seva, has recently stepped into married life, and still makes time for the things that matter to him. If you ever wondered how to progress in your career without burning out or losing your sense of purpose, this episode is for you. So let's jump into it. So once again, welcome to the episode, Shaan. If you don't mind, if you just want to give a little bit of an introduction, I kind of did a small introduction of yourself, but how would you describe yourself?
Yeah, of course, and super glad to be here. Thanks for having me on. As Jolt mentioned, my name is Shaan. I am a managing director with a company called Valsoft. I've been working now for just over 6 years. I graduated from a undergraduate business degree back in 2019, and my career has taken me to a few different spots, which I'm sure we'll get into today. Outside of work, I have a ton of different hobbies, including playing sports, spending time with family and friends. I've recently gone more into golf, which has been a ton of fun. And as you alluded to, I also got married back in October. So, 6 months or 7 months of married life has been a ton of fun with lots of learning and growth for me as well.
Are you used to saying my wife now, or is it still like awkward for you?
Uh, I definitely still drop the my fiance every now and then. So it hasn't taken, or it's taken a bit of time to get used to, but I feel like I'm kind of losing the wedding newbie status, so I got to get used to calling her my wife more often.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I know you kind of mentioned that you graduated and went into a career in consulting. Um, so what kind of drew you to consulting? Because, and if some people might be listening to this, they might not be kind of sure like what consulting is, but what kind of
Yeah.
drew you and what was your reasoning behind pursuing a career there?
Yeah, great question. And honestly, it's one that I get a ton of when I talk with students. I would say the trigger for me, honestly, was a combination of people and internships. When I started at the Schulich School of Business at York University, I always thought I was going to go into finance, and that was really what I had set myself up for. I joined the finance club, I joined the student investment fund, and found ways to progress in those clubs, build my network in finance. But like I said, the combination of people and internships that I had really took me in a different direction. On the people front, I as I continued to build out my network, I'd spoken to people who had a combination of both finance and consulting experience. And chatting with them really, just helped me understand the pros and cons of both fields and really open my eyes to a path that I hadn't really considered before, which was consulting. Um, and so that's where building a network and having people around me was very helpful. And then the internships part of the equation just helped bring that to life. It was a great opportunity to understand, what the day to day of a consultant looks like. Most of my internships were at Deloitte, and so got to work in a big firm environment, working with super talented and smart people to really understand, what consulting is all about, how we partner with our clients to drive value, the role that we play. And I think for me, the big learning was this was a career in a field that I thought would be super, super helpful for my learning and development, both professionally and personally. And so wanted to make sure that as I got into the back half of my time at Schulich, that I was setting myself up for a career in consulting.
If you don't mind me asking, like, what kind of companies or what kind of work were you working on? Like, for example, I know like some firms like they have divisions. Like if you're working with accounting and finance departments, they work in the mining space, or they might be working with tech companies. Was there something specific like that you were doing, or was it more open?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think the answer to this question is probably, at least in my opinion, the biggest value prop of a career in consulting, and at least at BCG. And the value prop is really, it just gives you optionality, honestly, to do whatever it is that you want, both at an industry level. So you can hop around industries from financial institutions to consumer products to oil and gas to whatever else is of interest to you. but also on the topic level as well. So, you can be focused on growth strategy, you could be focused on new product development, you could be focused on people and operations. And really, what I think a firm like BCG does a great job of is finding the nexus of those two things, both industry and topic, and really just giving you multiple at bats with the different combinations and permutations of industry and topic. And through that, I think what you'll find is there's a ton of accelerated growth, both in your professional skill set. So for me, I spent just about 5 years at BCG, and in those 5 years, I would say I got exposure to a ton of both industries and topics. Spent some time in private equity, spent some time in transportation and logistics, spent some time in consumer products, and then across those industries, like I said, had a great opportunity and experience working across different topics that I thought were cool and engaging, like due diligence, like new product development, like operations. And I think what's great about a firm like BCG is the type of problems that you're working on are what I would call board level or C-suite level problems. They're not your typical day-to-day tactical challenges, but they're top of mind for the senior leaders of an organization. So what you'll find is that the time horizon for some of these problems is longer term. What you'll find is the questions, tend to be more existential questions. A good example is when I was at BCG, one of my first projects was a growth strategy project for a Canadian grocery company. And that grocer post-COVID obviously had a huge influx of cash from the grocery boom that happened in the early days of 2020. And they were trying to figure out, what does the next 10 years look like? And how do we use that cash infusion to really make the right investments and set ourselves up for growth for not just the next 6 months or the next year, but the next 10 years and beyond. And so the type of questions that we were answering for them, they weren't your again, how do we grow in the next 6 months or next year? It was, should you think about expanding into the United States? Do you think about expanding into other retail non-grocery verticals like clothing, as an example? Do you think about stepping out of the grocery business entirely and become a logistics business? Use your combination of stores and your not delivery network, but your logistics network to really become a logistics partner, kind of like what Amazon is doing with Whole Foods, so on and so forth. Again, these are more existential questions as opposed to, we have an immediate fire that needs to be put out. And I think when you're, 21, 22 years old, there's a ton of value that comes from those types of experiences. And to be able to do that over and over again over a multi-year period, I think just really accelerates your growth. So again, very long-winded way of answering your question, but if I were to sum it up, had the opportunity to work across a bunch of industries and topics, and I think it was exactly that drew me to consulting and to BCG specifically.
So I think you kind of touched on this point that when you started, you were like 21, 22. You're dealing with these executive level problems. And one of the things is that I've transitioned into more of a strategy role. And that corporate strategy mindset or that strategy mindset, how did you kind of develop that? Was it just through repetitions from working with all these projects, or was it through mentorship? Like, what kind of helped you develop that mindset? Because as you said, most of the time people, when they're faced with these problems, try to look at the day-to-day operations, but you need to look at a broader perspective. So how did you kind of develop that skill?
Yeah, so a few things. I think one is, a consulting or, like in your situation, a corporate strategy type role. In my opinion, a lot of these roles are what I would call apprenticeship jobs, meaning you learn a lot just by watching other people and how they do their job and their day to day. For me, for example, watching, senior partners talk to CEOs of major Canadian and North American enterprises, that gave me a ton of insight into not just the types of conversations to have, because obviously that's quite obvious when you listen to a conversation, but also things like, how do you communicate effectively? How do you structure and present thoughts and ideas? How do you come across as a credible speaker on a topic? How do you, be persuasive? Because at the end of the day, they're asking you for an opinion and a recommendation. Similarly, when I'm working with more junior people, watching them use Excel or watching them use PowerPoint or watching them ask questions in a client meeting, you just learn a lot from that continued exposure. And I think the repetition of that, like you alluded to, is super helpful. And I think that you'll find that that environment where you're exposed to so many different types of people, where you have that apprenticeship, is a big driver of that fast L&D and that fast growth that I talked about. The other thing, honestly, is I think being intellectually curious is probably one of the most critical skills in this type of environment. Asking the five whys, to every scenario, to every situation, getting to the second and third order insights to try and understand why things are happening the way that they are, or what the drivers are of a certain problem. I think you'll find that that is where true value lies. And that's not to say that these companies or the clients that a firm like BCG works with can't do that. Obviously, they have very smart, very intellectually curious people working there as well. They just have other constraints, like they have an actual day-to-day job that they need to do on top of, focusing on core strategy questions. They might be hyper fragmented. And so they don't necessarily have the time or the resources or the expertise to dedicate to a specific problem, whereas a firm like BCG does, and they have this collection of people who are asking the five whys. They have this collection of people who are intellectually curious and are fully dedicated to this problem. And so you'll find that that type of environment is really, really helpful for growth, but also partnering with clients to help drive value.
Yeah. So it seems like your career at BCG was very rewarding, very for at least for a young person joining into the workforce, a great experience. So what kind of motivated you to kind of shift from your career at BCG to this new role that you are in currently?
Yeah, it's a good question, and honestly, one that I thought through a ton, because I would say if you look at some of the stats and data from a firm like BCG, 5 years is a really long time to spend. And if I think about the people that I started with when I started at BCG back in January of 2020, I think almost all of them are gone. And it was a group of like 20 people. And I think save for like two or three others, including myself, most other people had left. They had left to business school. They had left to pursue other opportunities. We're just doing different things outside of BCG. So 5 years for sure is a very long time. And this was a question that I was asking myself quite regularly. I think what it came down to, honestly, was I wasn't really actively looking for another role or another gig. My day-to-day at BCG was a day-to-day that I enjoyed. I enjoyed working on the problems that I was working on. I enjoyed working with the people that I was working with. Um, and so there was never really, this like burning platform or impetus to leave. It was very much, me enjoying the role. I saw continued growth and success for me at the firm. So all to say, things were going quite well for me at BCG. What happened was I actually just had someone reach out from my current organization, Valsoft. It was their head of talent, and she reached out with this opportunity that I'm currently in now. I decided to take the call, and as conversations progressed, I realized that this opportunity would be an accretive sort of learning and development opportunity for me, much like I thought BCG would be an accretive learning and development opportunity when I stepped out of Schulich. And so I realized that this would be a great opportunity for me. And, as I spoke to mentors about it, as I reflected on it, as I obviously talked to my wife about it, I realized that it would be a good opportunity for me. And so I decided to jump at it. I would say two reflections from that process. One is, I'm at a stage in my life where I can afford to take risks, much like yourself. And obviously everyone's appetite for risk is different, but I was in an environment where I was super comfortable at BCG, and there was no, like I said, impetus to leave. And changing that up is a risk, but I saw it as an opportunity for me to round out my skill set, to learn something different, to join an industry that I thought was interesting. And so the risk made sense. And then the second is a bit more tactical, but I would say never say no to a networking call, never say no to a call to discuss, a potential opportunity. You can always turn it down later if you're not interested, or, if you're not looking to leave or anything like that. But sometimes these opportunities just come up, and it's very much a right place, right time thing. And you want to increase your odds of being in the right place and right time by having those conversations, by building a network, by talking to people, so on and so forth.
One thing that I notice a lot of people, at least our age, do is that they eventually have a goal that, okay, I want to leave the corporate world or I want to pursue my own thing. The last two guests I had, they were more entrepreneurship in nature. So is that something that you ever struggle with? Like, how do I continue having a growth in my career, but how do I, if you have any desires to like, pursue an entrepreneurial path, how do I manage that? Or is that not something that's really, your cup of tea?
Yeah, that's a great question, honestly. And I think this current gig that I have now with Valsoft is a good blend of being in a structured corporate environment while also having an entrepreneurial flair to it. And so for me, this was like a step towards that direction. I definitely have a ton of hunger for running my own business or running my own portfolio of businesses, and it's unclear if that'll happen in the next few years or beyond. I think, as I said, I saw Valsoft and joining Valsoft as an opportunity to learn and develop my skill set in how to acquire a business, how to run a business, how to enhance the profitability and operations of a business. And so I figured that, if I have that long-term goal and vision in mind, this will be a super accretive opportunity for me just to build out that skill set. Um, so that I would say is still probably the North Star. Again, at some point in the future. I think right now, I'm really enjoying what I'm doing and continuing to grow. Um, I will say that it is, even if you have an entrepreneurial mindset, which I think I do, it is tough, I think, once you are settled into a career to then pivot and switch entirely to an entrepreneurial path. And maybe that's just me, because I know a lot of people that have done it, and have been quite successful for themselves. For me, at least, the trade-off becomes a lot bigger because on one hand, you have a very clear career and a clear career path. You have a salary that you're making, you have continued growth opportunities, so on and so forth. And trading that off for an unknown, I think, is equally exciting as it is daunting. And there is an opportunity cost to trading all of that sort of clear definition that comes with a career for, again, an unknown. And if you're able to make it work, the reward is a lot higher. But I think once you're on one path, the risk of switching is just higher. And like I said, that's not to say that I don't want to do it, because I think I do. There is just a higher risk involved, and I think to switch to that path, as we all know, to be on the entrepreneurial path, your risk tolerance needs to be quite high. And I think it needs to be a little bit higher when you have one path that you're trading off for another. So that's really the big hurdle that I guess I'm trying to solve and figure out that how I get over that hump, because there is an opportunity cost and it's quite high. But I still think, as we were talking about the North Star of, running my own business or a collection of businesses, I think it's quite attractive to me.
One thing that I always thought when I was in university or things like that is that, okay, I have this career, this will be the game plan, and then, after at this age, I'm going to do this. But what I'm starting to realize is that that game plan is always evolving, it's always changing, and there's going to be opportunities that you didn't think of that are going to show up. So
Yeah.
my question to you is that how has your definition of success changed from your early 20s to now? I'm not calling you old, but like as you're more
I
mature
still
into
consider
your
myself in
career.
my early
Yeah.
20s, even though I'm not. Yeah, maybe before I get into that question, just to comment on what you were saying, I think if you talk to, I only have whatever it is, 5, 6 years of work experience. If you talk to people that have been working for a lot longer than I have, I think every single person you talk to will tell you career growth and career development is very rarely linear. It doesn't work exactly the way you want it to. And that's a good thing, because industries change, trends change, opportunities open up that you may not have considered before. For example, AI is opening a huge window of opportunity into new skill sets and into learning new things that may have been closed off to you before if you didn't have a computer science or an AI, more technical AI background. So things change, and I think you'll find that as those trends change, as things change, there's tailwinds for your career that might take you to different spots that you didn't realize would be accessible before. Um, Going back to your question though, in terms of the definition of success, and if it's changed, I don't think it has, honestly. I think when I first started, when I graduated, the way I defined success was I want to be able to have the choice and the flexibility to do whatever it is that I want to do. If I want to be able to go on a trip, I want to be able to do that. If I want to, take a risk in my career, I want to be able to do that. If I, so on and so forth. And so having that sort of luxury of choice and flexibility, I think for me is how I've defined success. And part of that comes from the money that you make and sort of your personal balance sheet and the money side of being able to have that flexibility. Part of that is a whole lot of other things. Like part of that is having good health, as an example. Part of that is having a good set of people around you. Part of that is staying grounded. There's so much more to it than just money. And I think for me, it really just comes down to I want to be able to do the things that I want to be able to do, and I want to make sure that I have everything in place to afford that flexibility and luxury. And so I don't say I wouldn't say I'm like by any means successful right now, because I think I still have a long way to go, and there's still so much that I want to be able to do. But I think if I compare, where I'm at to that definition, and honestly, when I look at most people around me, including people like yourself, I would say like most people are successful. Like if you want to spend time with your friends or take a vacation or do something nice for your family and friends, whatever it is, like we have the flexibility to do that. And I think sometimes people anchor their definition of success to I want to be making $1 million a year by the time I'm 25, or I want to be retired by the time I'm 35. Like, sure, have those goals, and if you achieve them, great. But if you don't, you shouldn't be hanging your head and not sort of feeling good about what you've been able to achieve and accomplish. Instead, I think if you have, um, a definition of success where you can sort of scale it up over time as you continue to grow, I think you'll find that it allows you to keep pushing yourself while also ensuring that you're able to realize that you're successful in any moment.
Yeah. And I know you mentioned that like flexibility is something that is probably one of key priorities for you when it comes to work. And I know personally that you also make a lot of time for doing seva or volunteering at our temple and like the activities involved with that.
Yeah.
And just to give you guys an example, it's not like he's just like, coming on like a week by week basis. You have a pretty large responsibility when it comes to these type of things as well. So not only are you balancing your work, but you're also balancing your seva. How do you practically make time for seva with such a, high demand role, especially at your stage in the career?
Yeah, look, it's tough, and by no means do I think I'm anywhere close to being the North Star of what success looks like. There are tons of people out there that do much, much better than I do. Um, I've just been lucky to be able to learn from those people, and I would say there's two things that have helped me. I think one is it's important to empower people around you. I used to, when it came to save our volunteer work, I used to want to do everything myself, and that's a good thing. Let's don't take it the wrong way. I wanted to do everything myself. The only challenge was that with that is that it's not scalable. There's only so much that you can do when you have other responsibilities like work, which at the very least takes up your hours from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. every day, if not more. Whereas, while I was at school, yeah, I could afford to, spend some time in the middle of a lecture, responding to emails or doing some seva, or, after class, just spend some time in the library. And so that flexibility and luxury to do everything myself is gone. But all it means is that I need to empower the people around me. I need to, be more of a team player. I need to be working with people to give them direction and guidance and input so that we can all collectively as a team do the seva. It's not about, you know, you or me or someone someone specifically making time for seva and then doing it successfully. It is a team effort, and we all have a collective responsibility to make sure that we're doing the seva correctly and to the level that our gurus would want. And so I've really tried to take that piece of guidance and the advice that I've gotten from my mentors to heart, and really just focus on doing what I can do while also empowering the people around me. I think the other thing is that principle, like I said, while I was at school, of finding pockets in my day to do seva, that principle still holds true too. I'm very lucky. I work a desk job where I'm on a laptop or a computer basically all the time. And so, yeah, if I see a message or I have 5 minutes between meetings to write an email, I try to do that because it means that's 5 minutes that I've been able to do it a lot faster. And it means I've saved myself 5 minutes down the line to do other seva if and when I have the time. And so, finding time in my day to do things like that, or calling people on my commute, or, so on and so forth. I think it's important to find micro slots of time in your day to do seva. And I feel like that it doesn't solve the whole problem, but what it does is it helps you feel like when you've wrapped up work, it doesn't make you feel like you have this mountain of seva to be done. And that becomes a little bit overwhelming. You start to see seva like a burden, which isn't a helpful thought to have. And so if you're able to do it in bite-sized chunks on an ongoing basis, I think, at least I've found, that it's more sustainable, and it helps prevent any sort of negative thoughts or feelings that may come when anyone, and it's only natural, but it prevents any negative thoughts of like, oh, this is a burden, this isn't something that I want to do, it's taking up too much of my time, so on and so forth.
And that's one of the things that I personally look up to you for, is the way you're able to manage not only your career, but also your dedication to Mandir and your dedication to your seva. That kind of balance is something that I know, like me personally, I'm working towards that. And a lot of people listening to this, either it be seva at Mandir, or it could be any volunteer work that they're doing or extra projects that they're doing, that everyone wants to kind of find that balance. And I know when we started off this episode, we also mentioned a big milestone for you, which was getting married. A lot of our listeners are around the age of either navigating that space or about to get married, or are, thinking of it, hopefully in a year or so. So one question for you is that, how do you and your partner support each other's growth? Especially during our 20s, is a time where our lives are going in different ways. You have different priorities, different goals. How are you able to align yourself with somebody else's goals and as well use them to help you in your own personal journey?
Yeah, great question. I think it's, in the spirit of what we've been talking about, my wife and I, we don't have what I would say like very clear definitions on what growth looks like. And I mean that in a good way. The way we define growth is really, how do we push ourselves to be the best version of ourselves each and every day? And how do I support her in doing that? And how does she support me in doing that? On some days, that can be quite tactical. For example, it can be pushing each other to do adivation and do mukbang practice each and every day, versus letting the other person say we can't do it and give up. Some days it can be just encouraging each other to go to the gym rather than sleeping in, or just doom scrolling on TikTok or something. So some days that form of just pushing ourselves to be the best version of ourselves can be small tactical behaviors. On other days, it can be a lot bigger. It can be tied to helping each other succeed in our careers. It can be tied to, learning a new hobby. I think the spirit of what we've really tried to embody is whatever it is that the other person is excited or passionate about, however the other person has defined what growth and being the best version of themselves is, we will be there to support that however we can. And we'll hold them to that standard in a helpful way, but we'll hold them to that standard. We'll provide the motivation and encouragement that we can. And through that, even if our paths are not entirely the same, which is totally okay. Like she has a different career than me. She has different hobbies than I do. It's okay if we have different interests or things that we're doing. But again, I think the spirit of just pushing each other to be the best version of yourself, no matter what your path is very important.
Do you think that after getting married, the way you see success or the way you find balance has kind of changed, or does that really get affected by marriage?
No, not at all. I mean, earlier, like I said, success to me is having the luxury and flexibility to do whatever it is that you want to do, and I think that definition for the both of us still holds true. I would say there's probably two micro things that have changed. One is instead of whatever it is that I want to do, which is what I had said was my definition of success. It's the luxury and choice of whatever it is I want to do. Obviously now we're a team and we have common goals and things that we're working towards that we want the flexibility to pursue. So I would say from like a semantics perspective, it's having the choice and flex to do whatever it is we want to do. That's one. And then the two is I think we very, in the spirit of the last question that we were just discussing, I think both her and I have very quickly come to realize that we are an enabler for each other's success. We have to support each other in the ups and downs. We need to be there for each other, celebrate each other, encourage and motivate each other. And I think we both see each other as a big sort of stakeholder in our success. And I know it sounds super cliche, but I truly do think, a partner is a critical component of success in anything. And, I have to say for sure that my wife has been a huge, reason, and a huge driver of the decisions that I've made, of the moves that we've made both professionally and personally, and a lot of that is because of her. So I would definitely say she has been a huge driver and influencer over my path and the success that I've had.
That's a great point. Like sometimes when I'm listening to award speeches or something, a lot of time people mention like thank you to my partner, or like even athletes mention. And sometimes you're like, at least when I was young, I was kind of confused. I was like, what does that actually mean? Like, aren't you the one who's actually putting in the work? Like, aren't you the athlete who's in the gym? Like, how does like your wife play a role in that? So as I get older and listening to your story and listening to a lot of other people's story, I'm kind of starting to realize the importance a good partner in your life has. So it's good to hear that you guys kind of have that relationship, kind of hold each other accountable, and have someone to lean on whenever there is time for you to do that. And another great thing about you is that you've always been approachable. I think one of my fondest memory of us is when I was doing my internship in downtown at Brookfield. You were also working in the same building, and like obviously it was my first time kind of experiencing something big of like the downtown financial district. So I was kind of nervous, and I think you took me out for a coffee walk, and then I think we just walked the path for like 30-40 minutes. And during that time, I got more comfortable, not only in my environment, but just like with you as well, and just like approaching you. And I think I really admired like the small talks that we had and the advice you've given me. So this, before we end off, I want to ask you for some advice for young professionals who are listening to this episode, specifically for someone who's kind of just starting their corporate journey. What kind of advice would you give to them, or what kind of advice would you wanted to hear if you were in their position?
Yeah, there's a lot, and I think a lot of that comes from just experience. Like again, I'm not that old, but you see things over the years, and you have regrets on things that you wish you did or didn't do. And so I'm quite open and try and share my learnings and reflections as much as I can. So like I said, there's a few. I think one is that people are super important. I think that this has been a thread through our entire conversation. But I think if you are in a corporate environment, especially in like a business or finance type environment, having a strong network and people relationships is critical. And I think oftentimes people tend to over-index on their sort of current network, let's call it, like the people around you in your current job. And they tend to forget, potentially about people that they may have interacted with in the past. For example, I haven't done a great job of connecting and staying in touch with people that I've worked with in prior internships, even though I should. And it's because, I've sort of spent my networking time talking to people that I currently work with right now. And, you're just so focused on the present, which is important, but building a network is about staying in touch and building relationships and maintaining relationships with all people that you sort of come into contact with, and all people that you've that you've resonated with. And like I said, that has been hugely helpful for me in my career. I think being open to networking, open to having chats, it's what got me my current job, and I wouldn't have had it otherwise unless I, accepted that LinkedIn request and had a conversation. And so, maintain your network, talk to people, be open to connecting with people, and people are, I think, a great asset for you as a new professional, and so you should do all that you can to maintain those relationships. I think an extension of that is finding mentors. I've been super lucky to have a ton of mentors. Obviously, my guru, but also people in the Mundir community, people in my career and in my professional environment. And it's these mentors that have, been huge thought partners on decisions from work to personal investments to whatever else is going on in my life. But I think mentors and finding mentors is helpful. A mentor-mentee relationship, it doesn't need to be anything formal where, you write an email to someone and ask them to be your mentor. But what it does need to be is intentional. It needs to be, you as the mentee reaching out for help, making them feel valued, maintaining the relationship, so on and so forth. And I think that you'll find that mentorship, especially as a young professional where you are sort of dealing with a lot, you're trying to figure out things, that becomes very helpful. And then the last thing I would say is don't say no to opportunities to upskill yourself. I think we're in an environment where, things are changing. The best people are finding ways to continuously grow and develop their skill set. I think AI has changed a lot in terms of what skills are accessible to people versus not, as we've heard in previous podcast episodes. So, don't say no to learn things. Go to conferences, read a book, take a course. It'll make you a better professional for it over the long term, even if you don't see an extension of those things right away. But make that investment, because honestly, it's a pretty low bar to do something like read a book or read an article or go to a conference. And even if it helps you be 1% better, in my mind, as a 20 something professional where you have probably 20, 30, 40 years ahead of you in your career, those steps that you take now could set your direction up differently and set your career path up differently. And it'll have been a worthwhile investment if it even improves things by 1%.
That's some really great advice. And I think everyone listening to this is definitely going to benefit from that. Now, I don't want to put you on the spot, but like a fun last question for you is, what does Shaan's day look like 5 years from now versus 10 years from now? What does it look like? What does he start off with? Just to kind of do some, I guess, foreshadowing.
Yeah, that is a good question. I think probably a bit idealistic, but I think there's certain parts of my day that'll never change. Or at least I never want to change. For example, things like going to the gym. I've been trying to prioritize going to the gym in the mornings because I just find the gym is more empty than it is other times of the day. So I'm hoping I can keep going in the mornings. Another big part of my day that I never want to change is spending some outdoors time. I know it can be quite tough with our Canadian winters for like 4 or 5 months of the year. But like my wife always tells me, getting some sun and going outdoors for a walk improves serotonin levels, and that's important. So I'm trying to prioritize that as well, along with everything else, like spending time with family, spending time on seva, personal projects, building in some time for decompressing. So I would say, honestly, like if I think about 5, 10 years from now, structurally, I think like the big building blocks of my day, probably won't change. At least I hope they don't change. I'm sure, family circumstances and things, will probably require new blocks of time to be opened up for, like kids or things like that in the future, although that's still many, many years away. But, I'm sure there will be natural changes like that everyone has in their life. Ideally, from a work perspective, like I said, I try not to anchor on goals like I want to be retired or things like that. But yeah, it would be great, 10 years from now, if I am retired and that my current gig goes quite well. I definitely wouldn't say no for that. So maybe let's set 10 years from now, stretch goal. I'm on a golf course in the middle of the day. And 5 years from now, yeah, five years from now, I'm still doing my day to day and setting myself up for that.
Once again, Shaan, like thank you so much for being here and keeping it real with us. I think a lot of people listening, especially those in the corporate grind like myself, will walk away from this conversation with a sense of clarity and peace. You've shown that it's not just about climbing the ladder, but doing it while keeping your values, your community, and your personal life in focus. To everyone tuning in, if this episode gave you something to think about, share with a friend who's navigating their own career journey. Whether you're trying to figure out your next step or just looking to stay grounded while going after big goals, you're not alone. As always, thanks for listening to The Ordinary. Until next time, stay curious, stay grounded, and keep showing up as your full self.